My name is Marin Ashford. I am 34 years old. In the autumn we buried my grandmother. My mother demanded a paternity test on my 8-year-old son to cut him out of the inheritance. I said yes before she finished her sentence. She expected me to cry. She expected me to beg. She had spent months telling half the valley that my boy was not really mine to give away, and now she wanted a laboratory to make it official. So we swabbed, we signed, we waited. 4 weeks later, on an ordinary Wednesday, the lab called my cell phone. They did not want to talk about my son. They wanted to talk about the sample my mother had submitted as her own. What sat inside that report did not just end her claim on my grandmother's estate. It cracked open a secret my mother had carried for 42 years, a secret our entire family had been living inside without knowing it, and it landed first and hardest on the woman who had built the trap. But that phone call only makes sense if I start from the beginning, from what my mother tried to take, and how carefully she built the very thing that caught her. Welcome to Hearthly Stories. To picture my life, picture grapevines. I live in Willow Bend, a small valley town where the school calendar bends around harvest, and everybody's casserole dish has a family name taped to the bottom. I have worked as an occupational therapist for 10 years. I have been a widow for 4. My husband Daniel was killed by a drunk driver on the Coast Highway in 2021, and since then it has been me and our son Eli, who is 8, who loves carving small wooden birds more than video games, and who works twice as hard as any kid I know just to get through a stutter that catches on the letter S. The center of my world was never my mother's house 3 miles away. It was my grandmother's vineyard house 4 miles out on Ridgeline Road. Opal Vance grew wine grapes for 55 years and raised me on the side every summer, every hard season of my life. This past September at 88, her heart began to fail, and I took leave from work and sat with her through hospice, in the same bedroom where she herself had been born. On the last clear night, she gripped my hand with a strength that surprised me. Her eyes went sharp the way a dying person's eyes sometimes do, like fog burning off a hillside. She said, "If Renata ever turns on that boy, ask your mother about the winter of 1982. I said, "Grandma, what happened in 82? She looked at me like the answer was sitting right on her tongue, heavy as a stone she had carried too far to set down. Then the medication pulled her under, and she never surfaced long enough to finish. She died on a Sunday morning in October, with frost still on the vines." I wrote the words on a scrap of paper, the winter of 82. I had no idea I was holding a key, a word about my mother, because everything that came next grew straight out of who she is. Renata Cole, born Renata Vance, is 60 years old, president of the Historical Society downtown, and the self-appointed keeper of the Vance family line. She kept the old family Bible with every birth inked in by hand. She could recite our pedigree back 4 generations the way other people recite recipes. Her love always came with a scoreboard. I made the honor roll. She asked why not valedictorian. I became a therapist. She asked why not a doctor. I married a good man. She asked about his people. My whole childhood was an exam I could pass and never ace, and I kept sitting for it anyway, year after year, because some part of me believed the grade was finally coming. Her favorite phrase, she would say it holding her coffee, calm as a sermon, was always the same. "Blood tells the truth, sweetheart." She said it about a neighbor's divorce, about a cousin's adopted daughter, about anybody whose life she had decided to audit. And after Eli was born through in vitro fertilization, she began saying it near me quietly, the way you flick lint off a coat. She never once called the clinic by its name. She called it that place, and she called my son the clinic child. I corrected her every single time, and she would smile and pour more coffee. It stayed small, an ugly little habit, until Grandma Opal died, and there was suddenly an estate on the table. At the funeral reception, I heard my mother across the hall telling the Historical Society ladies about the will, before it had even been read. And I noticed she had stopped saying Eli's name entirely. She called him the boy twice. My mother is precise with her words. That is when my stomach started bracing. Elaine Pruitt has handled Vance family paperwork for 28 years, from a small office across from the courthouse. The Thursday after the funeral, we gathered there, my mother, her brother Foster, his wife Denise, their daughter Harper, and me, with Eli's booster seat still sitting in my car. Grandma Opal's trust was simple and stubborn, exactly like her. The vineyard operation split evenly between her 2 children, Renata and Foster, an education fund of $30,000 for each great-grandchild, Eli and Harper's 2 little ones. My mother nodded along, gracious, already composing the version she would tell at church. Then Elaine turned the page, the cottage and the 15 acres of original vines around it, to my great-grandson Eli Ashford, held in trust until his 25th birthday, with my granddaughter Marin as caretaker until then. The room went so quiet I could hear the old radiator tick. Foster let out a low whistle and grinned at me. Harper squeezed my hand. My mother did not move. The cottage was the crown of everything, the house her own mother had been born in, the house she had already told her friends she planned to restore. And Opal had reached past her, past me, and set it into the hands of an 8-year-old who carved wooden birds. When my mother finally spoke, her voice was pleasant, which is exactly how I knew it was dangerous. Elaine, she said, smoothing her skirt, how does the trust define a descendant? Exactly. Elaine glanced up over her glasses. There was a pause I did not understand yet. A pause with a history inside it. Arthur added that language back in '98, Elaine said carefully. It reads Descendants of Arthur and Opal Vance by blood. My mother smiled at the table. There it is, she said softly. There it is. She invited the whole family for what she called a healing dinner the following Sunday. Roast chicken and good china, and she waited until dessert was served to begin the surgery. Eli was in the den with Harper's kids, watching cartoons, mercifully out of earshot. My mother set down her fork and announced that before anybody transferred a house to anybody, the family deserved certainty. You all remember Marin went through that clinic in Portland, she said. The injections, the petri dishes, all of it. And you have all seen the boy, dark-haired, when this whole family runs fair. She let that hang there, as though she had just proven a theorem. Then she said she had found a brochure years ago on my own kitchen counter about donor embryo programs at that place, and that a grieving family could not be too careful with a 15-acre legacy. I told her evenly that the brochure came in the standard welcome folder every single patient receives, and that Eli was made from me and from Daniel, and that Daniel's own grandmother had that same dark hair in every photograph ever taken of her. My mother tilted her head with that terrible patience of hers. Then you will not mind being sure, she said. We should be certain the boy is actually family before we hand him Mama's cottage. I looked around the table, at Foster studying his plate, at Denise blinking, at Harper's husband suddenly fascinated by his napkin, and I waited for one grown adult to say the obvious thing out loud, that a woman was auditing her own grandson's blood over dessert. Nobody did. The furnace hummed. Somewhere in the den, a cartoon laughed, and I understood I was going to be standing in this alone. Here is what my mother was spitting on. Daniel and I married in 2013, in Opal's vineyard, under vines so heavy with fruit the photographer kept laughing. In 2014, I had a miscarriage that nearly took my life on a Tuesday night. We saved for 2 years after that. In 2016, we did in vitro fertilization in Portland, my own eggs retrieved from my own body while Daniel held my hand and made terrible jokes about the paper gown. My embryo transferred fresh, that same season. I have never been more certain of anything than I was of the origin of my son, because I paid for that certainty in needles and grief. Eli was born in March of 2017, and Daniel cried so hard a nurse brought him orange juice. So no, the rumor did not scare me on the facts. But I am not naive about how rumors travel, and I had already acted once before. Back in 2017, when my mother-in-law garbled some story about the clinic, offering donor options after a failed cycle, a conversation that never actually happened, I requested our full embryology records, read every page, and filed them in the fireproof safe. When my mother resurrected the lie that autumn, I called the clinic the very next morning for a fresh certified copy. That is when I learned the clinic had merged with a larger health network the year before. Records requests were running 60 to 90 days minimum, one polite voice told me, and certified copies were taking even longer. 60 to 90 days. Remember that number, because my mother, it turned out, was not planning to wait that long, and neither was her lawyer. The certified letter arrived on a Friday, addressed to Elaine Pruitt, with copies to every beneficiary, from a lawyer 2 towns over on behalf of Renata Cole. It formally objected to any distribution to Eli Ashford absent proof that the minor qualified as a lineal descendant by blood under the 1998 amendment. There was Arthur's phrase again, weaponized, and I finally understood the pause in Elaine's office. My mother had gone looking for that language, and she had found it waiting for her like a loaded door hinge, but the letter was only half the move. The other half came quietly, the way she preferred. As trustee, my mother had authority over the education funds, and she used it. Disbursements suspended pending resolution of eligibility questions, her lawyer wrote. That fund was paying for Eli's speech therapy, $150 a session, twice a week with a therapist who had finally gotten my son past the letter S. I did the math at my kitchen table at midnight, the way widows do, and started picking up extra shifts. I called the clinic again about the embryology records. Still in the queue, still 60 to 90 days, the same polite voice. And anyway, Elaine warned me gently, medical paperwork would not settle a challenge like this one. Courts trust one thing in a parentage dispute, she said, and it is not a folder from a fireproof safe. It is an accredited kinship test, chain of custody, collected under supervision, results binding on everybody. I sat with that for a moment. My mother wanted a blood trial. Elaine was telling me the fastest way out was straight through it. Fine, I thought. Let us go straight through it. Elaine called a family meeting to discuss the objection, and my mother arrived dressed for a verdict, navy blazer, pearl earrings, her lawyer's card tucked into her purse like a talisman. She opened with a speech about legacy and stewardship, and then she laid it down like a trump card. Unless Marin consents to genetic testing, this family will never. And I said yes, right over the top of her sentence. Every face swung toward me, waiting for an explosion that never came. My mother blinked. I said it again slower so the room could catch up. Yes, an accredited lab, full chain of custody, samples collected under supervision, results binding on every single one of us in writing. When do we swab for half a second? And I will keep that half second like a pressed flower. My mother's certainty flickered. Then the mask reset, and she reached over and patted my hand. Blood tells the truth, sweetheart, she said. Elaine cleared her throat and turned lawyerly. Since the standard being invoked was descendants of Arthur and Opal by blood, testing Eli against me alone would not answer the legal question. The lab would want a family reference panel for the Vance line, she explained, a sample from Renata as Opal's daughter, and ideally one from Foster as Opal's son, to anchor the lineage from both children. My mother answered before Elaine had even finished. Mine will be enough, she said, no hesitation, no breath, the words dressed and out the door before anyone else's thoughts had shoes on. Foster shrugged. Denise checked her watch, and the meeting moved on to scheduling. But driving home, I kept snagging on it. She had been eager. My mother is never eager, and I could not yet figure out why. If my mother is the family's judge, her brother Foster is its barn. Foster Vance is 56, runs the vineyard day to day with hands like old rope, and distrusts any document longer than a seed catalog. I drove out that week and found him pruning the Cabernet Rose, and he came down off the ladder slow and hugged me with one arm, the way he always does. We do not blood test family like cattle, he told my mother flatly at the meeting, no anger in it, which from Foster is basically a filibuster. But he agreed to give a sample anyway, because in his arithmetic, anything that ended the war fastest was worth a cheek swab. Denise was less serene. The frozen education funds touched Harper's 2 kids as well, collateral damage nobody discussed at church, and Denise had opinions about a trustee freezing her own grandchildren's money out of spite for a third one. Foster mostly wanted to talk about Eli. He had promised the boy they would graft a stubborn old vine come spring, teach him to set the bud properly, and Foster keeps promises the way other men keep trucks. Before I left, he wiped his hands and said something that snagged in me and stayed. You know, when we were kids, Mama used to disappear every December, he said. Just for a day, took the truck, told nobody. Dad never asked, so we never asked. I used to figure she was grieving somebody. Never did learn who. He shrugged and climbed back up the ladder, an easy man at ease, no idea he had just handed me a puzzle piece. December every year, a grief with no name on it. I put it on the shelf in my head, right next to the winter of '82, and the shelf creaked. 11 days before our collection appointment, my mother came to my house alone. She sat at my kitchen table, accepted coffee she did not drink, and slid a folded check across the wood, like a woman feeding a parking meter. $55,000. Her terms were dressed as kindness. I would decline the cottage on Eli's behalf quietly, no test needed, and the family would knit itself back together, and she would personally release the education fund by Monday. Think what that money does for you now, she said, glancing around my kitchen at the widowhood of it all, the single income, the coupon drawer. She was not wrong about the arithmetic. $55,000 was a year of therapy sessions, a new roof, breathing room. That is what made it obscene. I turned the check around with one finger and slid it back. I asked her the question I had been carrying since Elaine's office. If you are so sure he is not blood, why are you paying to stop the test? The pleasantness dropped off her face like snow, sliding off a roof. For a second I saw something underneath I did not have a name for yet. Not anger. I see anger every shift. Parents in therapy rooms have taught me all its faces. This was older and colder. It looked, if anything, like fear that had learned excellent posture. Some things do not need a laboratory, Marin, she said, gathering her purse. They need to stay closed. Then she was gone, heels sharp on my porch steps, leaving her coffee full and her sentence open. I did not sleep that night. Around 3 in the morning, I caught myself rehearsing how I would explain the check to my mother's satisfaction, polishing my answers for her scoreboard, the way I had done my whole life. And something in me went very still and very tired. I was 34 years old and still sitting her exam. That, more than anything, is what decided it. Monday morning, I walked into Elaine's office and signed the stipulation. Accredited lab, supervised collection, results delivered to all counsel, entered into the estate file, binding on every party, no withdrawals once samples were taken. My hands were steady. I want that noted somewhere because everything after this point happens because of that signature, mine, freely given, eyes open. My mother signed the same document 2 days later, and I am told she used her good pen. While we waited for the appointment, my mother fought the war on the front she knows best, which has nothing to do with laboratories. Willow Bend has one grocery store, 2 churches, and a rotation of casseroles, and information moves through it faster than a cold. She never said anything actionable. She would simply go sorrowful in the produce aisle. We are praying for clarity about the little one. You know how those clinics can be, and let the town's imagination invoice me for the rest. Within 2 weeks, the mother of one of Eli's classmates uninvited him from a birthday party with a text so carefully worded it could have been notarized. A woman from the Historical Society touched my arm by the pharmacy counter and said, with real kindness, that whatever came out, God loved even the mix-ups. My son, a mix-up, delivered with a pat, in the tone you would use for a casserole that did not set. Here's the thing nobody tells you about a smear campaign in a small town. Fighting it feeds it. Every correction becomes a scene. Every scene becomes a story. Every story has my son's name in it. So I worked my shifts, showed up at school pickup with my chin level, and smiled at women who had already decided. But driving past the church that Sunday, watching my mother greet her friends on the steps, gracious as a governor, I finally understood her actual strategy. She did not need to win at the lab. The lab's answer was weeks away, and the checkout line voted daily. She just needed Willow Bend to convict him first, because a town that is already sure does not read reports. What she had not counted on was who else would be standing in that lab. That week, I kept reaching backward for steadier ground, and I kept landing on the same afternoon, spring of 2020 at the vineyard, my grandmother, 84 years old, still fitting a grafting knife to her hand like it grew there. Eli was 3, all cowlick and rubber boots, and Opal decided it was time. She set him on an overturned crate beside a row of wild seedling vines, bitter little volunteers nobody had planted on purpose, and showed him how to cut a scion from her best Cabernet, how to match the green edges just so, how to bind the union snug with tape and wax. The vine does not ask where the cutting was born, she told him, working the wrap with her thumbs. It asks whether the edges meet. You match the living edge to the living edge, and you hold it still long enough, and come summer, you cannot find the seam. Eli asked, in his halting way, if the new branch was pretend. Opal laughed so hard she had to sit down. No, sir, she said, a graft takes, and it becomes the vine's own branch. Ask anybody who grows. Then she looked at him for a long moment, that pale blue stare over the top of her glasses, and something moved through her face that I mistook at the time for ordinary love. It was not ordinary. I know that now. She kept a photograph of that afternoon on her refrigerator until the day she died, Eli's small hands on the tape, hers over his. The winter of '82, a nameless December grief, an old woman teaching a boy that belonging is a thing you bind on and hold still until the seam disappears. All the clues were on that refrigerator. I just could not read them yet. Connection Day was a Thursday morning at an authorized site in Portland, a beige suite of offices where kinship cases go to be handled without feelings. The protocol was almost beautiful, honestly, if you are a person who loves procedure the way I do. Photo identification checked and copied, photographs taken, gloves on, seals shown to us intact, one cheek swab at a time, each one bagged and barcoded in front of its owner and signed across the seal. Eli thought the swab tickled, and asked the technician, word by careful word, if the machine would know he was going to be a vine man someday. She told him machines only know some things, which is the truest sentence anyone said that whole autumn. My mother arrived like an inspector general, correcting the receptionist's pronunciation of coal, narrating the importance of accuracy for everyone's benefit. And then the door opened, and Foster walked in, appointment slip in one hand, cap in the other, apologizing for his boots. My mother's face did something I had never seen it do in 60 years of it being pointed at me. It went from porcelain to paper. Elaine added him to the reference panel last week. She explained smoothly from her chair, both of Opal's children, to anchor the line properly. My mother stood up. She said the scheduling was irregular. Said proper process deserved better coordination. Said her head was splitting, actually, and perhaps her sample should be collected another day when things could be done to standard. The technician, bless her, said today's collection met every standard and that rescheduling would require notifying every attorney under the stipulation. The room waited. My mother sat back down, and when her turn came, the woman who had preached blood her entire life handed over her driver's license with a hand that was visibly trembling and whispered to nobody at all, "Blood tells the truth." You could call what happened over the next week odd. If you had never worked intake on a bad night, I would call it symptomatic. My mother telephoned the laboratory twice, that I know of, with questions about procedure, who reviews the raw data, whether reference samples are compared to each other or only to the child, whether a family could simplify the analysis by withdrawing one of the reference samples purely to reduce confusion. The lab, of course, told her nothing beyond the standard brochure language and referred her to counsel. I know all this because Elaine called me dryly to relay the fourth question, the one aimed at her, whether the stipulation allowed a party to pull a sample after collection. "It does not," Elaine said. "We wrote it that way on purpose," and I could hear her eyebrows over the phone. I did my own due diligence, too, because I do not sit quietly with loose ends. I asked Elaine point blank whether a sample could be swapped or contaminated between that beige office and the lab bench. She walked me through the chain of custody, sealed, signed, logged, scanned at every handoff, and I checked the lab's accreditation myself on a night shift break. The way I would check a medication I did not recognize. The process was sound. That was exactly what unsettled me. Because here is the picture, if you laid it on my triage desk. A woman demands a test publicly for months. The test is granted on her terms. And the moment a second reference sample enters the frame, she develops a migraine, questions the calibration, and asks, hypothetically, purely for simplicity, how to take her own evidence back out. People who are certain do not ask to unring bells. People who are cornered do. The waiting might have stayed almost bearable if the war had kept to the grown-ups. It did not. On a Wednesday, Eli came off the school bus with his backpack hugged to his chest like a shield, and he did not talk through snack, and he did not talk through dinner, and at bath time it finally came out in pieces, the way hard things always come out of my son. A bigger kid, a cousin of a cousin on Harper's side, repeating kitchen table talk, had told him at recess that he was not real family, and that everybody was getting a test to prove it. He asked me if the test could take the vineyard away. Then he asked the sentence that took the skin off me, if the test could take him away. I have delivered difficult news to families for 10 years, and I have never needed my training the way I needed it, sitting on that bathroom floor. I told him the truth in his language. I told him about the wild vine and the Cabernet, the living edge matched to the living edge. I told him what great-grandma Opal said, and made him say it back to me, until he was grinning through it. A graft takes, and it becomes the vine's own branch. He fell asleep holding the roll of grafting tape Foster had given him, the way other kids hold a stuffed animal. I sat in the hallway outside his door a long time, and I made a promise with a dial tone hum to it. Whatever that lab found, he would never again be the one on trial. 3 days later, my phone rang with a Portland number. It was a Tuesday late afternoon, 4 weeks almost to the hour since collection day. I was still in my work clothes in the clinic parking lot, keys in one hand, phone in the other. The woman introduced herself as a case manager with the laboratory, verified who I was, and then said the sentence I had been bracing against for a month. "Mrs. Ashford, the analysis involving your son is complete, and I want to reassure you right away, that is not why I am calling." I actually laughed, one dry cough of relief, before her tone registered. Then she chose her words the way people walk on ice. In processing the case, she said, one of the family reference samples produced an unexpected result. Under our procedures, we have rerun and confirmed it, and we are required to verify certain information about the donor of that sample before the report is released. The full report goes to the attorneys of record this week. I asked what unexpected meant. She said she was not able to discuss findings by phone. I asked, my voice sounding very far away, very professional, which reference sample. There was a pause, a shuffle of paper, the sound of a decision being made about how much was already mine to know. "The sample submitted as the reference for Mrs. Cole's daughter," she said. The daughter reference. My mother. I stood in that parking lot while the sky did absolutely nothing dramatic, no thunder, no wind, just a Tuesday going about its business, and I felt the entire chessboard rotate underneath every piece on it. My mother had demanded this test to prove my son did not belong to her family. The lab had no questions about my son. The lab had questions about her. I drove home very slowly, and I did not call her. That night, after Eli was asleep, I sat at the kitchen table and worked the problem like a case file, because that is what my hands know how to do with panic. Option 1, a swap. Somebody's sample mislabeled. I had watched every seal go on, photographed, signed, barcoded in front of us. Chain of custody was not a rumor to me. I had verified the accreditation myself. Unlikely. Option 2, lab error, possible anywhere. But the case manager had said rerun and confirmed, and labs do not call attorneys of record over a hiccup they can quietly fix. Unlikely. Option 3 was the door I kept walking past without opening, because on the other side of it, everything in my family rearranged itself. An unexpected result in a reference sample does not mean the machine broke. It means the sample told the truth and the paperwork did not. I called Foster. He had gotten a shorter version of the same call, a meeting at Elaine's office Friday, results to be presented to all parties, please attend. He sounded like a man reading a foreign menu. What in the world do they need me for? He kept saying. I called my mother last, straight to voicemail 4 times. My mother answers by the second ring, her whole life. Missing a call to her is a moral failing. Thursday morning, Elaine phoned me herself with an update that made the hair on my arms stand up. Renata had retained separate counsel overnight, not her estate lawyer, a new one, and his first act, before anyone had seen a single page of results, was a letter demanding the entire test be voided and every sample destroyed. She demanded this test, I said stupidly. Elaine was quiet for a second. Yes, she said, she did. Friday, 10 in the morning, Elaine's conference room, coffee nobody drank. Foster and Denise on one side of the table, me on the other, and 2 empty chairs where my mother was not. She had sent the new lawyer instead, a crisp man who took notes and gave nothing. Elaine opened the lab's report and read it in layers, and I want to give it to you the way it landed on us. Wart 1, maternity analysis, Smarin Ashford and Eli Ashford. The probability of maternity exceeded 99.9%. My son is my son, from my body, exactly as I had bled to know. The donor embryo rumor died right there on page 1, in a sentence with no adjectives in it. Denise reached across the table and gripped my wrist, and I let out a breath I had been holding since the funeral lauder 2, and here Elaine slowed down. The reference panel had been analyzed for internal consistency, standard procedure. Eli Ashford and Foster Vance tested against an expectation of great-nephew and great-uncle, no biological relationship detected. My head came up. Marin Ashford and Foster Vance, expected niece and uncle, no biological relationship detected. The room had gone airless, and the reference samples themselves, submitted as full siblings, Renata Cole and Foster Vance, daughter and son of Arthur and Opal Vance. The data is inconsistent with a full sibling relationship, inconsistent with a half-sibling relationship, and consistent with unrelated individuals. She set the page down with the care you would give a live wire. The laboratory's flagged conclusion, confirmed on retest, the sample submitted as the daughter reference, shows no biological relationship to the Vance family line. Foster did not move. A fly tapped against the window glass twice and gave up. My mother, the keeper of the blood, the auditor of everybody's veins, was the stranger in the family Bible. Understand the cruelty of the mechanism, because it revealed itself in stages, like frostbite warming up. First, vindication, warm for about 90 seconds. Then Elaine, apologizing in advance, walked us through what the law would do with this. The trust's standard, the standard my mother's own objection had invoked in writing with her good pen, was descendants of Arthur and Opal Vance by blood. If that language were enforced literally, it did not stop with her. It ran downhill, Renata out, me out, my son out, cottage and all. The entire half of the estate, on our side of the family, would pour by default into Foster's branch. Foster, Harper, Harper's kids. The only ones left standing under the definition my mother had sharpened herself. Now, Elaine said, the law has a long tradition of treating a legally adopted child as a full descendant, and that would solve this cleanly. Where there was a legal adoption, an adoption order, a court record, anything. She had already had her paralegal search. There was nothing. Whatever happened 42 years ago happened outside a courtroom, and the only paper on earth claiming Renata Vance was born to Arthur, and Opal was a home birth certificate signed by a midwife in the winter of 1982. The winter of 82. Opal's grip on my hand in the hospice bed, fog burning off her eyes. Ask your mother. Foster drove his thumb and forefinger into his eyes and said to the table, 42 years, in a voice I had never heard from him. And me, I was watching a different reel entirely. The beige office, the paper-white face when Foster walked in with his appointment slip, the migraine, the phone calls about withdrawing a reference sample. My mother had not been afraid of the test failing my son. She had known the whole time what it could find in her. My mother stayed unreachable, her new lawyer stonewalled, and the 72 hours that followed belonged to a question with a date on it. I had every legal right to be in the cottage. The trust named me caretaker until Eli's 25th birthday, and my key ring had carried Opal's brass key since hospice. But climbing her attic stairs that Friday night still felt like opening someone's chest. I went straight to the cedar box I had seen my whole life, on a shelf above Opal's sewing table, always locked, always just a box, the way a landmine is just a plate. The little key was in her sewing tin, under the thimbles where she kept every key she ever owned. Inside, in tissue paper gone soft at the creases, a newborn's knitted cap, pale yellow wool, never worn, still holding the shape of nothing. Under it, a receipt on brittle letterhead, St. Bernadette's Maternity Home, December 1981, boarding and confinement paid in full. The home 2 counties over that Opal's aunt had run for 30 years. Under that, a birth certificate for Renata, home birth, Arthur and Opal Vance listed as parents, the midwife's signature slanting hard, a date that sat 3 weeks after the date on the receipt. And at the bottom of the box, one sealed envelope, Opal's handwriting across the front, for Renata. I sat on the attic floor with the bare bulb swinging, and Foster's voice came back to me. Mama disappeared every December, mourning somebody, never did learn who. I held the envelope a long time. It was not addressed to me, but the woman it was addressed to had spent the autumn trying to erase my son, and the woman who wrote it had used her last clear breath to point me here. I opened it, Renata, my girl. It began, "If you are reading this, I am gone," and something has finally forced the door open. So let me stand in it myself before it swings loose on its own. In November of 1981, your father was away on the coast for the winter contracts. The way he was every year, gone until spring, letters and one phone call at Christmas. In December, I delivered a daughter early at home, with only the midwife and my own mother in the room. She lived not quite 1 hour. I will not describe that hour. I have lived inside it every December since. What I did next, I did out of grief and shame, and the way things were handled then, and I have run out of years to pretend those are excuses. My aunt ran St. Bernadette's home. There was a girl there, 17, from a good family that wanted its problem to disappear. That is how people spoke about babies then. Forgive all of us. Her daughter was 3 weeks old. The midwife wrote this certificate with our names on it, and no one blinked, because no one blinks at a home birth out here in the dead of winter. Your father came up the drive in April and lifted you over his head and cried, and I watched him fall in love with you before his suitcase hit the porch. And I said nothing, that day or any day after. You were never second best, Renata. You were the child I chose with my whole broken heart. I only found the courage to say it once, in 1999, in a hospital waiting room when they were asking about your father's heart, and I watched it turn you to stone, and I let it. A graft takes, my girl. It takes your mother every single day of it. Opal, so now I knew everything, and knowing it helped nothing, because the machine my mother had built was still running and it had no brakes. Monday brought the vice. Foster called me from his kitchen, miserable, with a stranger's business card in front of him. A lawyer named Grady Holt had driven out to the vineyard, sought Foster out, not the other way around, having heard, the way lawyers hear things, that the estate had developed an interesting problem. Holt's pitch was simple as a knife. Enforce the blood standard Renata herself had invoked, and Foster's branch takes the entire trust, every acre, the cottage, all of it. He had already drafted the motion. It sat on Foster's table next to the salt shaker, needing one signature. And here is what that piece of paper actually meant, laid out plain. If Foster signed, my mother would be dismantled in a public courtroom, her birth certificate picked apart, St. Bernadette's subpoenaed, 42 years of her life read into a record any neighbor could pull. But the same motion took the cottage from Eli, the same standard that unmade her, unmade my son and me in the same sentence. Foster knew it too, and it was tearing him up. 40 years. She looked at me across the table and let me call her my sister, he said, and his voice cracked in the middle of it, then went quiet, ashamed of its own anger. I do not want her humiliated in a courthouse, Marin, and I will not take that boy's vines. But Denise is watching Harper's kids get frozen out all season, and this man says it is all or nothing. Elaine, when I relayed it, was blunt. Get everyone to a table in 72 hours, she said, or this goes somewhere none of you can steer it. My mother had been missing from every phone and every doorstep for 2 days when I finally thought like her daughter instead of like her opponent, and drove to the cemetery behind St. Mark's. Her car was parked on the gravel loop, engine off, in front of Opal's grave. The sod still seamed, the headstone so new it looked embarrassed. She was not at the grave. She was in the car, hands at 10 and 2, staring through the windshield at a spot 3 rows over. And when I followed her line of sight, I found a marker I must have walked past 100 times in my life. A small stone flushed to the ground, no name, just a lamb worn nearly smooth, and a single date, December 1981. The daughter who lived not quite an hour. Opal's December errand, kept faithfully for 42 years. I stood beside the car for a while, on the outside of the glass, and my mother did not look at me, and for the first time in my life I saw her at her true scale. All that pedigree, all that blood tells the truth. A woman who had spent her whole adult life standing sentry at a gate, checking papers, because she knew better than anyone alive how easy's to get in without them. It did not make me forgive her. My son had cried in a bathtub because of her. There is no exchange rate that settles that. But you can refuse to forgive someone and still decline to burn them. I knocked once on the glass. She rolled the window down maybe 2 inches. Kitchen table, I said. Tomorrow at 7, just us and Mom. Bring your good pen. Then I walked back to my car and let her sit with it. That night, I laid both roads out on my kitchen table. Literally, 2 legal pads, because I am a person who thinks in checklists. Road 1 had a lawyer's momentum behind it, and the town's appetite waiting for it. Let Holt file, watch the standard my mother sharpened, swing back through her own life in open court. She would be stripped of the trusteeship, the pedigree, the historical society, the porch step graciousness, everything she had used against an 8-year-old. Part of me, the part still holding a report card somewhere, wanted her to feel every degree of it. But that road ran straight over my son. Litigation would freeze the trust for years and feed it to legal fees. The cottage would hang in limbo, and Eli's name would headline the whole circus all over again, because in Willow Bend, the story would never be about Renata's birth certificate. It would be about that family and their tests. Scorched earth does not check whose kids are standing in the field. Road 2 had no precedent I could point to. It was not in Holt's playbook, and it would never occur to my mother, which is exactly why it could work. She had spent her life converting fear into proof, demanding papers at the gate. I had one thing she had never had at that gate, the choice not to demand any. So I wrote out 3 conditions on the second legal pad, short and clean, no adjectives. In the morning I dropped Eli at school, worked a half shift, and at 7 I drove the 3 miles to her house. Her kitchen had not changed since I was a girl, the oak table with the good wax shine, the wall clock you could hear in every silence, the chair where I had sat for every verdict of my childhood. She had set out coffee cups, because form is the last thing to surrender. I did not sit in my old chair, I sat in her mother's. Then I took the envelope with the laboratory letterhead and laid it on the oak between us, unopened, label up, and said nothing at all. My mother looked at that envelope the way people look at weather coming across a lake. Then quietly, with the clock counting, she came apart. Not loudly, nothing in my mother is ever loud, but like a seam giving thread by thread. She told me about 1999, 33 years old, a waiting room smelling of hospital coffee, her father's heart failing down the hall, a doctor asking routine questions about family history, and Opal's hand closing over hers. I have to tell you something before you answer him. She told me what it does to a person, learning at 33 that your blood is nobody's in an era with barely a word for it. She had believed the test would compare Eli to me and stop there. She was so certain the boy was the intruder that the panel felt like formality. Then Foster walked into that collection room with his appointment slip, and she understood in one lurch that she had ordered the excavation of her own grave. For a moment, watching her hands shake around a cold cup, I saw the 17-year-old at St. Bernadette's and the hour-old girl under the lambstone, and my mother, all 3 held by the same winter. The moment passed, her chin came up, and she reached for her checkbook. "Name it," she said, pen already moving toward the amount line. "The cottage question goes away. The fund releases, you can have the trusteeship, all of it, and we burn that letter. And this stays in this kitchen, and family stays family." There it was, the same check as before, with more zeros and more fear. And I finally saw the whole shape of her, the way you see a fever break on a monitor. Even now, cracked open at her own table, she could only imagine belonging as a transaction, something bought, notarized, defended at a gate. I moved her checkbook aside gently, the way I move sharp things away from patience. "I am not selling you my silence, Mom," I said. "I am going to give it to you, and it is going to cost you the gate. 1. The objection is withdrawn this week, unconditionally, in writing. 2. You resign as trustee, Elaine takes over, and the education funds release Monday morning, Harper's kids and Eli both. 3. Saturday, you sit in Foster's living room and tell your brother the truth yourself, out loud with me beside you. In exchange, the report stays sealed in the attorney's files where the law already keeps it, and Willow Bend never hears so much as a whisper of the winter of '82 from me. Not the historical society, not the grocery store, not anybody's checkout line." She stared at me a long time. "You would protect me," she said, "after what I did to that child." "I am not protecting you," I said. "I am done proving there is a difference, and I am 60 years closer to understanding it than you are." Then I stood, put my hand flat on the unopened envelope, and gave her back the only inheritance of hers I ever truly received. You are right, Mom, I said. Blood tells the truth. You did for 42 years. I will not. I left the envelope on the oak, and I left her sitting with the clock, and I drove home to my son. Saturday evening, Foster's living room, the wood stove ticking, Holt's drafted motion lying on the coffee table where it had sat all week like a pistol nobody would touch. Denise made coffee and then stood in the doorway with a dish towel she never used. My mother sat on the edge of the couch in her navy blazer, armored for the worst appointment of her life, and for once the polish would not hold. She started at 1999 and had to stop. Started again at St. Bernadette's and had to stop. I did not rescue her, and neither did anyone else. Some things a person has to carry across the room by themselves, but she got it all out. The stillborn sister under the lambstone, the midwife's signature, the 42 years of standing guard at a gate she had slipped through as a 3-week-old. When she finished, she put Opal's letter, which she had not burned, on the table next to the motion. Her hands were not steady. Read it if you want, she said. Your mother wrote it. Foster is a slow man on purpose. He does his thinking before his talking. He looked at the letter, and at his sister, for the length of 2 full ticks of the stove. Then he picked up Holt's motion, crossed the room, opened the stove door, and fed it in. The fire took it the way fire takes anything, indifferently, completely. You taught me to drive the tractor when I was 9, he said, still facing the stove. You sat up with Harper's kids when Denise had pneumonia. 82 or no 82, that is the whole test, and you passed it before I could walk. Then his voice went hard for the only second of the night. But nobody lies in this family again. That is my condition, and it is not negotiable. My mother nodded at the floor. Monday morning, in Elaine's office, she signed everything with her good pen. The paperwork took less than an hour, which felt almost rude given what it settled. Objection withdrawn unconditionally, trusteeship resigned, Elaine appointed successor, the education funds released before lunch. I got the deposit alert standing at the copier, and Harper texted me a row of exclamation points from her end. The cottage and its 15 acres stayed exactly where Opal had set them in trust, for Eli Ashford until his 25th birthday, his mother as caretaker. The laboratory's report went into the sealed estate file, between 2 attorneys who are paid to forget things professionally. No courtroom, no headline, no scene at the grocery store. Willow Bend to this day believes the test simply proved what tests usually prove and finds us boring, which is the most expensive gift I have ever purchased for anyone, and it did cost me. Let me be honest with you about that, because the price is the part nobody puts in the family Bible. On the steps outside Elaine's office, my mother stopped, gloves in hand, and worked her mouth around something for a moment. Opal would have picked you to hold this, she finally said, and walked to her car. That was the whole speech. I stood on those steps and understood, with a clarity that felt like swallowing a stone, that I was never going to hear the word sorry, not for the rumor, not for the frozen fund, not for a little boy hugging his backpack on a school bus. The apology I had been earning my entire life had never actually been in stock. I let it go on a Monday morning on a courthouse street, and it felt exactly like losing something, because it was. Then I drove to the school, signed my son out early, and took him to the vineyard. October in Willow Bend smells like crushed grapes and diesel, and that year the harvest came in heavy. On a bright cold Saturday, Foster took Eli out to the 15 acres, the boy's own 15 acres, to work the old wild vine the way he had promised. I trailed them with a thermos and no intention of helping. Foster cut the scion, Eli matched the edges, tongue between his teeth, and bound the union in tape with the concentration of a bomb technician. It is the vine's own branch now, Bud, Foster said, and Eli repeated it to himself twice, smooth as river water, and then said an entire long sentence about root stock without swallowing a single word of it. 10 months of therapy, paid in full, and paid forward out loud in the cold air. I would have traded every acre for that sentence alone. And there was one more thing that morning, which I did not arrange and did not expect. My mother's car came up the vineyard road slow on the ruts, and parked a respectful distance out, and she stood at the fence line in her town coat, watching. She had been that morning to St. Mark's Cemetery. I know because of what now sits against the little lambstone 3 rows from Opal, a pale yellow knitted cap, replaced fresh whenever the weather takes it. She did not come into the vine rows, and nobody made her. But Eli saw her and waved with the grafting tape still in his fist and hollered, "Grandma, we are making branches." And my mother, the auditor, the gatekeeper, the woman with the pedigree, inked in a Bible, lifted her hand and waved back at a boy whose blood she once demanded in writing, "We are not healed." I want to be honest with you, this is not that kind of story. She and I speak carefully, at arm's length, 2 porcupines managing a doorway. But it is real, all of it. The care, the distance, the fence, the wave. Nobody at that vineyard is pretending anymore, and after 60 years in my family, that is not a small harvest. A few loose ends, because I know you are wondering. Opal's letter lives with my mother now. I handed it over for good the night of the kitchen table, because leverage kept in a drawer is just a slower kind of demand, and I am out of the demanding business. The lab report sleeps in Elaine's fireproof safe. The clinic's certified records finally arrived in late winter, 13 weeks after I first asked, thorough, notarized, and completely beside the point, which is its own kind of funny. Eli will hear the whole story when he turns 18, every winter of it. The three of us agreed on that in Foster's living room, because the lying is over. But an 8-year-old does not owe the town his family's history when somebody at the grocery store fishes, and in Willow Bend, somebody always fishes, asks me whether the boy got the Vance look after all. I just smile and say he has got the family hands, good for grafting, and let them chew on it, and me, I stopped auditioning. I cannot tell you the exact day it happened, but somewhere between a beige collection office and a wood stove, I resigned from the exam I had been sitting since childhood. And the strange thing is how quiet it is out here, off the scoreboard. My mother spent her life guarding a gate because she came through it scared. I walked away from it and found out the vineyard never had a gate at all. My mother demanded a laboratory prove that my son belonged in this family, and the only thing it ended up proving is what my grandmother's vines had been saying quietly for 55 years, that belonging was never carried in the blood but in who stays, who waters, who binds the living edge to the living edge and holds still, and who finally shows up at the fence line when they have run entirely out of things to prove. That is my story. One demand, one cheek swab, and a 42-year-old secret that fell into the very hole my mother dug for my son. If this reminded you that family is grown, not proven, take it as your sign, hug the ones who stay.